I don't know. It's hard for me to be super down on where they are right now and between now and game 82. Like, if they lose the next 3 games and lose the division as a result, then yeah, I'll be like, that sucks. You got to know the situation and have the awareness there. But like right now, I am firmly in get to the playoffs healthy. That game against Florida last Saturday, that was the last test. That was the last test for me. I'm good. Get me to the postseason now. I want to see the postseason. I don't care about anything else at this point.
Poke the Bear is powered by PrizePicks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of the CLNS Media Network.
And welcome into Poke the Bear, episode 220, presented by CLNS Media and sponsored by our good friends over at PrizePicks and Factor Meals. My name is Conor Ryan, and once again, we are joined by 98.5 The Sports Hub's Ty Anderson. Ty, how are you doing?
What's going on, Connor? How are we doing today?
Ty, I got to tell you, I've been better. The BU Terriers, against all odds, were eliminated last night by the referees and I guess the University of Denver. It's a tough hit. Wasn't great. Perhaps I'm just saving myself from further heartbreak if they got steamrolled by a wagon of a BC team on Saturday. But the vibes are not great. Morale's taking a hit. I'm not doing well.
It's understandable. I get it. This is not what you want. This is why you should be like me and be a college dropout, and you never have to worry about a team. I don't have teams. I can just pick whoever I want. I was rooting for you guys because I like some of you. I hate some of you as well. You always want to see the local teams do well. I think BU versus BC for the national title would have been great. We don't get it. Instead, we get 2 maroon teams going at it, which is it's going to be really confusing. If I just throw that game on mid-game, it's going to take me like 10 minutes to figure out who's who, I feel.
Yeah, it's not going to be great. And even if the matchups were better with the jersey, like when Maine plays BU, great jersey matchup. If it was even like Michigan BU or something like that, it would be beautiful. Now it's, I don't know. It's like, and again, it's like, not like Denver's this like shit kicker program. It's another blue blood school, but it doesn't hit the same way. It feels like we always get these like hyped up, like what could be these great eventual matchups. Like, it's like how we all took for granted, I think, how lucky it was that like an 0-8 it was Celtics Lakers, like out of the blue, considering where those teams were like a year ago. Now you don't really get those matchups anymore. We all thought it was going to be Vegas and Boston last year in the Cup final. That went to shit as well. So what can we do?
Yeah, you never get the good matchups. So stop rooting for good matchups. You're going to get Edmonton and Carolina, and you're going to like it. That's how it's going to be. You're going to get Winnipeg and New York, and you're going to like it. It's going to suck. It's going to be awful.
Gary Bettman's going to send 3 teams to Salt Lake City now instead. The cap's going to go down. All these horrible things. People say you're rooting for all these Canadian teams in the Stanley Cup. Cap's going to go up 5 cents if you do that.
Yeah,
stop rooting.
It's not good. It's not good. Need the big markets.
Yes. So anyway, I digress. I'll stop bemoaning the loss of my Terriers, I guess, for 30 minutes as we record this podcast. I want to get that out of the way now. But looking ahead to the Bruins tie, they play on Saturday against the Pittsburgh Penguins. 3 games left. Not a whole lot left on the to-do list for the Bruins in terms of what they need to see before the playoffs officially start. But Pat Maroon is, for right now at least, scheduled to be in the lineup. Montgomery, I know, mentioned on Friday that they're going to see how he feels on Saturday morning, but all signs point to him being in that lineup. And when you look at Pat Maroon and what he's provided throughout the course of his career, and again, this is a guy coming off of back surgery at 35 years old, not 2 things that generally jive pretty well together for a hockey player that's known for hitting, beating the shit out of guys. But what do you think Pat Maroon, if he's able to get into this lineup, can give this team down the stretch and more importantly in the playoffs?
Just another big body who can move, or should I say, can create space for his line mates, open things up for them depending on where he plays. It really feels like the Bruins could use him, with 2 speedsters to maximize the ice, the vision and the spacing out there as well. I'm curious where he slots, 3rd line, 4th line. It's going to be somewhere in that bottom 6, you'd imagine, unless things get truly dangerous. And now he's playing top 6. That's a bad recipe. So I think it's going to be somewhere in your bottom 6, just a matter of who do you want to put him with, and it's interesting. He was asked today, like, do you think 2 games, 3 games is enough time for you to get ramped up? And he said, I don't know. Do you? He says, he's not sure, but he says that he knows what he has to do, right? And so if you're looking at that timeline or that answer, it's going to be being physical. It's going to be being, getting to the net front, creating space for your line mates and going from there. So I think they want him to be more hockey player than, enforcer. More Lucic than, straight up Ross Johnston kind of gooning it up out there. Like, I think there's a healthy balance there. But I think that's the biggest thing. Just compliment your line mates, open up ice, go to the front of the net, create havoc, versus like fighting. If you got to fight, sure, go for it. But I think really it's about replacing Milan Lucic in that sense more than the dropping the gloves. Like he'll do it, but I don't think it's going to be his only role or his only task here in Boston.
And it's kind of crazy when you look at, I think when the Bruins first acquired Maroon, there was, again, as is the case with every trade, you have people immediately being like, I hate it. I don't like why they're getting this guy. But he's kind of been like a sneaky, important pickup for this team down the stretch when I think you look at, one, the fact you don't have Justin Brezzo, who seemed like he was all but a lock for the playoffs, right, in terms of what he was providing you in that bottom six. And now you look at like JVR, where his play has just unfortunately fallen off a cliff like the last 2 months now. You kind of need another dependable, just, straight line hockey, productive, third or fourth line guy out there. Like, you kind of need Maroon to, be a guy that can kind of hold his own out there, just because you're missing two guys that, if you looked a month ago, really were all but locks to be in this group somewhere. And now, whether it's, JVR being hurt or Brezzo, or JVR being, his production dropping off and Brezzo being hurt, you kind of really don't have those two guys right now.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, that's where they're really missing Justin Brezzo. And so that's why I think that Maroon's role is going to be kind of like replacing Justin Brezzo in a lot of ways. Like, be net front, win loose pucks, win secondary battles, extend possession, and come through with a tip here and there. And I think that's kind of where he's going to be. The thing that concerns me about that is that if you're coming off back surgery and you're playing the net front role on a power play, you're going to get a lot of cross checks in the back, especially once things ramp up in the playoffs. So that's something that's a little bit worrisome. But again, this is not necessarily, they don't have the benefit of time on their side right now. You get 3 games and the playoffs start. So he's got to get ramped up. And, it may not be the best timeline, but this is the hand they've been dealt, right? Between the Brezzo injury, as you mentioned, the JVR cool down, as you mentioned, and the fact that he had back surgery at 35 and he's running out of daylight here to get in games, like, you got to do it, right? And so how do you manage that, right? I can't imagine that he plays in both legs of a back-to-back, so how do you do that, right? And they're going to have to manage that from here on out, but, like, you kind of have to make do and hope that he can be Justin Brezzo, and that sounds weird to say that you're hoping a 3-time Stanley Cup winner can be Justin Brezzo, but Justin Brezzo was so effective that, like, you need production from that bottom six in some fashion. You've seen the way it's kind of dried up for some guys lately, and the Brezzo effect is real in that regard.
Yeah, and looking, kind of pivoting across this roster as well, and we've talked all about the goalies, we talked about Maroon, we talked about some other things the Bruins have to kind of check off their to-do list before they get to the playoffs. Two guys I think have maybe, at least over the last few weeks, have kind of flown under the radar in that regard are Jake DeBrusk, who's not really flown under the radar for most of this year in terms of when he's been running cold, and Trent Frederick. These are two guys that obviously are key pieces across the lineup in terms of what they can provide, how different this team looks when they're both kind of dialed in and adding offense, and hasn't really been the case that much for the past month, really. I mean, you've got DeBrusk was red hot in March, right? He had, 12 points in 10 games. Now he's 7 games without a point. Trent Frederick, who I think has been really strong all year, being more or less a line driver on that third line spot. He's gone 6 games without a point now. And I think he's only got 4 total points in his last 18 games. And again, when you look at the playoffs and how much this Bruins team is going to need all guys to kind of pull on the rope, we all know about DeBrusk and, his up and down play this year. That's Evan. They need to get him on a roll again. But especially the guy like Frederick, who's sneaky, has kind of a pretty big postseason come up for him, because as effective as he's been at times during the regular season the last couple of years, he needs to carry that over to the postseason, because you look at his skill set, he's a guy that would be built for the playoffs, and he hasn't really found that traction yet.
Yeah, and I think that if you actually go beyond the recent drought you mentioned, the pointless streak, I think he has a goal or an assist, I think, in just 4 of his last 15 games. Like, and the other thing with Frederick is that when he scores, they win. It's like a weird thing where like they are like 27-1-1 when he scores a goal over the last 2 years. Something crazy like that. I don't think it's that exact number, but it's something along those lines. And so this is a guy who, to your point, should be built for playoff hockey. We haven't seen it yet, though, right? And I think for the Bruins to get out of the first round, whether they draw Tampa, Toronto, whether they backdoor their way into the number 1 seed, given the Rangers' recent skid here, like you got to get that secondary scoring, right? And I think Trent Frederick is the face of that because Jake DeBrusk is a guy who moves up and down your lineup, right? Trent Frederick, for the most part, stays where he is. Stays on the third line. He might get an in-game promotion to the first line, the second line, but really he's going to make his money on that third line, right? That's got to be a factor. When they go deep, they get secondary scoring. When they bow out early, it's painfully top-heavy, right? And so he's got to get going. He's got to have a good postseason. And he's a guy who, I've loved his development of late. It's just, I got to see it when the games really matter. And it sounds unfair to him, but is it? You know what I mean? Like, it's a small sample size, but he's got to make a positive stride in that regard because this is a guy that, is a year away from signing a big money contract potentially. Big money by his standards, right? So you got to see some growth in that arena for him. And he's a huge factor for this team. It's got to happen. It's got to happen this year.
Yeah. I mean, even look at like last year, right? Where it's kind of his breakout year and the fact that he only played 5 of those 7 games against Florida and the average time on ice was like, I think it was like 10 minutes and 35 seconds, like was really reduced in that role. And again, he's a guy that kind of like what we said with like Maroon, right? Like he's not out there to drop the gloves. He can, and he's a willing participant, but like he's a guy that can score, has a really underrated shot, can hold his own, can win puck battles. He's a guy that so many other teams should look at in the playoffs and be like, shit, I really wish we had this kind of guy, right? It's like when you watch like Tom Wilson in the playoffs, right? You're like, I hate this guy, but damn, would I want him? Like Josh Anderson when he was on like the Blue Jackets, those kind of players. Like he should be one of those guys and just hasn't been the case yet. And then you look at DeBrusk, right? Like I do feel like it's better putting him back up with Marchand and Coyle because I think that's probably one where you can get him going, but also gets probably Marchand and Coyle involved too as well. Because again, it all comes down to it. Like when DeBrusk is proactive and productive in scoring, it just makes the whole rest of the lineup that much better, right?
Yeah, and the other part of the playoffs last year for Frederick was that I don't think he took a face-off. They had him playing center, but he wasn't taking faceoffs. I think Nick Foligno was taking those faceoffs for the most part. And like I think it is like the secret sauce, right? Like it is like the secret sauce. Like, you go back to 2019, you had the Coyle, Johansson, Heinen line looking good. You go back to 2011, you were saved in that first round by Michael Ryder, Rich Peverly, and Chris Kelly. Like it's got to be a factor, right? And then when we look at sort of what happened last year, I thought the Bruins did a pretty good job against Alexander Barkov in the playoffs. But it was the secondary scores for Florida that really, as the series went on, started to score some more impactful goals, get some big time production. And so, like, I think Frederick, DeBrusk, I'm even going to include Hampus Lindholm in this. Like, these guys got to have a good postseason. If the Bruins are going to escape the first round, these guys have to be a factor. It can't be all Pasternak, Marchand, McAvoy, and the goaltending. Like you're going to have one of these second tier guys that are still important, but are not first tier to really, make some inroads here. And DeBrusk, I don't really worry about because I think he's had 2 good postseasons, but Lindholm and Frederick, those are guys that I got circled right now. Like those guys gotta have a good playoff run here for this team.
Absolutely. A lot of pressure on those guys going into the end of April. Ty, before we talk a little bit more about the Bruins and what's upcoming for this team, let's take a quick break here from our good friends over at PrizePicks.
PrizePicks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It is the easiest and most exciting way to get on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. PrizePicks is so easy to play. I can make my Celtic picks and make my entry in less than 60 seconds. Quick withdrawals and easy gameplay and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what makes PrizePicks the #1 fantasy sports app. Celtics and NBA fans, you can get in on PrizePicks in 30 states across the country, including California, Texas, and Georgia. On PrizePicks this week, I'm selecting Jason Tatum to dish out more than 5 assists and his teammate Jaylen Brown to have more than 22.5 points. Download the app today and use code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. PrizePicks.
Shout out to our good friends over at PrizePicks. All right,
I had to switch up the hat. Sorry, I was so I got right over here from practice, and it's cold and raining out, so I was wearing a winter hat. It was the first hat I could find because I put a lot of the winter hats away because it's starting to get nice out.
Thank God, yes.
And it's bright orange, and I felt like it was reflecting when I was recording, and I couldn't tell if it was or not, or if my eyes are just going crazy. But I was like, I gotta switch this up. I'm losing my mind right now. So, so thank you for the commercial break there to go and change that up because I was like, I'm ruining this podcast right now. I am causing reflections on the camera. This is not great.
No, trust me. One, I've got this light way up behind me that I always make sure it's turned off because if not, it literally is blinding. This one, right up here. That one, one's pretty bad. But no, I mean, listen, I'll take it. It's like a Lady Gaga concert. Every commercial break, you change your outfits, and it's a crisp Cubs hat.
Yeah,
it's great.
Yeah, this is the new one. I got the new one because or a new one because my other one's starting to get a little grimy, little grimy. Can't have a smelly hat. That's like the worst thing that you can do as like an adult. Like we're not Trot Nixon. Like we're not.
No,
we're going out in public.
Yeah, nor should you be when like you're not a professional baseball player. Only Trot Nixon could do that as a baseball player, just like spitting tobacco juice like on his hat, rubbing it in with the resin. It's like, sir, you're a working professional. What are we doing here?
Disgusting. Can't have it. Yeah. So yeah. Shout out to Wrigleyville Sports. That's where I got this new Cubs hat. So quick delivery from Wrigleyville. Quick little plug for them. No, from Chicago to Boston in like 48 hours. Kind of wild. Not gonna lie.
Not too bad. Have you put away the winter hat that Jim Montgomery thought was an anchor, but it was the Rebel Alliance symbol?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. So
not a big Star Wars guy.
No. Well, you know what's funny is that a few times every month, Jim Montgomery will like notice my apparel in some fashion and ask about it. One time he was like, "Violent Gentlemen," and I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "Hey, that a boy," and I was like, "Didn't know you like them." All right, I got to tell Hammer that Jim Montgomery likes them. So yeah, the Star Wars stuff. Yeah, he's not a big Star Wars guy. That's all right. Yeah. That's all right. He's also not a big BU guy, as we all know.
We are all well aware of that. Yeah, he was probably the only. He was probably overjoyed to see BU get absolutely robbed in that game. So
by Denver too.
By Denver. Oh, I didn't even think of that. He was extra pumped then. God
yeah,
damn.
Exactly.
Damn. Anyway, I digress. Once again, the pain's coming back to me. Ty, when we look ahead now at the Bruins going into the playoffs, what do you think is kind of the most concerning trend like within the team right now that you think needs to get kind of shored up? We've talked all about the second guessing the goalie rotation, what have you, those kind of things. But in terms of just the team DNA or what has been kind of the flaws in this team, maybe over especially the last month or so, what's one thing you think could really kind of bite them once you get to when the games actually matter later on this month?
Yeah, I have my concerns about leaning on a Hampus Lindholm, Charlie McAvoy top pairing. Now, it's a great pairing in the sense that it's your two best defensemen on the same pairing, but can you survive those other minutes, right? That's a legit question that I think you could have about this team is like, can you do that and survive? Now you're going from worrying about 20 minutes with those guys not on the ice to worrying about 35 to 40. And, that'll dip down a little bit in the playoffs because they'll play a lot of minutes, but like there's a benefit to having those guys on separate pairings. Right. And so, as good as they're together, your depth overall is probably better when they are separated. And so that kind of concerns me a little bit. I didn't think that peak in Wotherspoon had a great game against Carolina. It felt like their lone bad game together.
Yeah.
You got 3 games left here. I'd like to get another look at Lindholm and Peak if I could. I'd also, I'd like to see, how do you manage does Shattenkirk get another chance here? Lowry got sent down to Providence, so he's not really an option. It feels like at this point they want him playing games. So, he's probably the first guy up for the playoffs if they lose anybody. But, you got some uncertainty back there, and it's when they lose, it's often because their defense is not in sync or connected. You know what I mean? And so that's a big thing for me, I think. And as good as that top pairing is, I kind of want them on different pairings. I'd like to see another look, of Peak and Lindholm or Carlo and Wotherspoon. Like I want to get a few more looks at some other options here before game 1.
Yeah, I think especially when you look at just how like Peak and Wotherspoon are with different guys, because again, you look at like they've gone with Grizzlick and Carlo for these last couple of games. Hasn't been like as crisp as you'd want there. And I think you both need, especially Carlo, playing at a high level in terms of what he does well. And if that pairing's out of sync, then you're taking on water at such a critical part of your lineup that, as you said, doesn't matter. You could have the best pairing in the entire NHL, but if the rest of your guys are just treading water or getting buried in their own end, it's not going to mean all that much, right? So no, that's a great point in terms of the pros and cons of that. Because I think a lot of people are viewing it as like, all right, you've got this great shutdown line, but what do you know? When you get into the playoffs, there's more than one really good line out there. And as you said, like look at Florida. A lot of their secondary guys, the ones that buried you in that matchup. So are you trusting, Carlo and Grizzlick or Wotherspoon and Peak to shut down some really good second and third lines? Like it's kind of you're jammed if you don't. But I think when this team is at its best, it's when you have 2, again, legitimate number 1 defensemen on 2 different pairs that account for, at that point in the playoffs, 70% of your total ice time, right? If not more, the way they're deployed.
Right. And so is the defense also your greatest concern or what is it? What is it for you?
I mean, I think for right now, one thing that I feel like I'm concerned right now, but it doesn't seem like the Bruins that are fretting that much about it, is the power play. It's just more the fact of just how stagnant it has been. Like, it's one thing if they're trying to force too many plays and they're being too aggressive and like the passes are getting picked off or they're telegraphing their plays. It's just a whole bunch of nothing right now is kind of what's been concerning for me, right? They're, I think, 2 for 27 in the last 9 games. And Montgomery kind of mentioned that they had a bit of a slow stretch last year and then heated up against Florida. So you just hope that with the amount of proven talent on that group that they can just elevate when they get to the playoffs. But let's face it, regardless of who you're playing in the first round, it's most likely Tampa or Toronto. It's going to be probably a couple of high-scoring games out there or a couple of games where you desperately need the insurance goal in the third period or the extra goal to give you a 2-0 lead early on against a team that can get back into the scoring column in a hurry, right? And I think the best avenue to do that is having a pretty effective power play. And over the last, month or so, it's been way too much perimeter play, way too much, not being aggressive. I think Montgomery mentioned, I think it was Coyle's goal last Saturday, that power play goal, where it was off of like Marchand, instead of, dishing it back out to McAvoy, drives to the net front. There's an opening. Coyle's in, grade A ice, feed it to him. There's a goal right there. Like, you haven't seen that a whole lot. It's a lot of plays to the outside, not a lot of just making this simple, smart play down low. And again, when you have that much talent, I think if you're Montgomery, you have faith that you can break through and get out of it, but you need to be operating at better than 2 for 27 against whoever it's going to be, whether it's Toronto or Tampa Bay in the next round.
Oh yeah, no doubt. And I think, what's interesting is that if we go back to a couple of years ago, different coach, different team, different scheme, I understand all that. Back in 2022, they ended the year on that massive, what was it, like 0 for 40 or something like that on the power play. And then they clicked at 21% against Carolina in that series. They lost a series, but it turned around in the playoffs. So yeah, like I think that to your point, like they need to get a couple of power play goals here between now and game 82, get a couple, get in rhythm, start feeling good about yourself, and start making confident plays. I think what I hate about their power play is just, I just feel like it's too, everyone is just stationary. There's not enough movement. I find with their power play. And I've said this before and I've written it before. Like, I just feel like that quarterback on that power play, the top unit, I feel like it just works more effectively with a left shot versus a right shot. And I like Charlie McAvoy on the power play. I almost like him more as that kind of, rover type, than a straight up quarterback. I think that's when he's really, really good, is when he's allowed to be aggressive and jump up and make plays, of that nature. But who's the left shot you'd put there? It can't be Grizzlick, right? Or it's not going to be Grizzlick. It's not going to be Lindholm, just based on his other usage right now, his other deployment. So there's something about that power play, that top unit. I just want to see more movement. I want to see less predictability. And just they gotta get their confidence going. So that's another great one, honestly. Like those are that's like 1A and 1B. I think defense and special teams. Like that's when those things aren't going right for them, they tend to struggle quite a bit, you'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that when we get to that anticipated Tuesday home matchup against the Ottawa Senators, a game that everyone will be looking forward to, game 82, maybe that'll be something to look forward to. Because otherwise, I got nothing for that game, Ty. I'm going to just my final story for that one's going to be a shoulder shrug. I don't know what to look forward to in game 82, but maybe the power play will be something worth keeping tabs on. So,
dude, I got to be honest with you. I felt borderline shoulder shrug about Tuesday. I think it was more impressive to win in Carolina than damning to lose in Boston, if that makes sense. Like they passed that test. They ended the road trip with a win in Carolina. That was a bigger test for me than Tuesday against Carolina and at home. I think it's more along the lines of what Charlie McAvoy said, that
yeah, you hit the nail on the head.
In a playoff series, you're going to win and you're going to lose. You're not going to win every game. You have to adjust. They adjusted. So now, if you see that team again, now you have to adjust from the last game. Like I don't know. It's hard for me to be super down on where they are right now and between now and game 82. Like if they lose the next 3 games and lose the division as a result, then yeah, I'll be like, that sucks. You got to know the situation and have the awareness there. But like right now, I am firmly in get to the playoffs healthy. That game against Florida last Saturday, that was the last test. That was the last test for me. I'm good. Get me to the postseason now. I want to see the postseason. I don't care about anything else at this point.
I do think it's crazy when you look at, I think it's just because you are in such in the moment and it only comes every, once a year, but in the playoffs, how much momentum swings are a thing and how great you feel about a team can change on a dime. And that's just the way playoff hockey is. Like people forget how, again, I've mentioned this with Evan, but history is written by the victor, right? So whoever wins a series has the final word on how they controlled the pace of that series, how they left their imprint over a win, what have you. But start of that Florida series, the Bruins are out muscling the Panthers at the net front. They were controlling play. Even you look at 2019, the Bruins were out, were knocked around, couldn't get into inside ice. Jordan Binnington robbed that series. They couldn't answer him. Game 1, they came back from a 2-0 deficit. Torrey Krug with no helmet rocked Robert Thomas. People thought this team was going on a warpath, right?
Right.
And what happened? And again, the Bruins lose game 2, come back in game 3 on the road, go 4 for 4 on the power play on 4 shots. You ride the wave. You can look great one day and bad the next day. And it's not always an indictment on your team. It's when you face a very competitive other NHL team in the playoffs, you're going to have these ebbs and flows. So I think, as you said, and as Charlie McAvoy said, that's kind of what playoff hockey is. So as much as you feel good about one game or the next, you hear people being up and down over that game against Carolina on Tuesday. Get ready for a lot of that, because if this team's going on a run, there's going to be great games the next day you feel great about talking with your friends. Other times you're going to be like, this team is cooked, and then they win game 5 or something, and you're back on the bandwagon. This is what's coming.
Yeah, exactly. And I think maybe I'm cursed by the fact that I can remember experiencing all these things you're talking about in the moment. And, I remember 2011, the Bruins were done 3 different times. They were on death's door, countless times. People forget that game 7 against Montreal, they gave up the game tying goal with a minute and a half left in the game, essentially. Or it was 2:10 or something left in the game. And you're like, oh my God, what? This is how it's going to end. And it didn't. You win in overtime, you're on to the next round, and you go from there. And momentum is such a crucial thing. And This is why, anytime that people have been panicking about the regular season, it's like we're not even at the point where you should panic.
To panic.
Like we're not even close. It's like being in an airport, being still on the runway and going, "Are we there yet?" Like we haven't even left the ground yet, man. Calm down. We're gonna be fine.
The video is playing that you're not listening to clearly with the AirPods in. Like we haven't said that yet.
You can't put the tray down yet, man. We gotta wait. You gotta wait. Can't put the tray down. No. So like, I can't help but laugh when I see like they're gonna be done in 5. We don't even know who they're playing yet, Connor. We have no idea how. Like, I just think that listen, people are duped or they don't want to get duped because they felt duped by last year's team, right? I get it. You don't want to believe in them. If you have a deep problem with how they've been playing the last, let's just say 3 weeks, I don't think you're paying attention. Like, respectfully, I don't think you're paying attention if you have a problem with them being 5-2 in their last 7 games, because I think they've been playing a tremendous team game. I think that they've beaten some teams that were really good or white hot. Their 2 losses over this stretch have come against a second leg of a back-to-back, and it was a 1-goal game until an empty net goal made it 3-1. You look at the loss against Carolina. The Bruins put 2 goals in the back of their net. They scored 2 own goals, essentially, on themselves. They were in it, right? And so they're not getting shit stomped by good teams. And I think that's important. Just be in games. That's what we've said from the jump. They've been in games. So I'm not saying they're going to win the Stanley Cup, but I think that you should be a bit more confident than a lot of the defeatist sort of attitudes that you see on Twitter or in my emails from readers and listeners. Like, this is not a bad team. They're not a great team, but they're not a bad team. It's not smoke and mirrors. They got some good structure. It's just got to come together at the right time, much like Florida a year ago. So we'll see.
Yes, just enjoy playoff hockey, guys. It's almost here. We got Audio Slave playing pretty soon. It's going to be great. Just enjoy the moment,
dude. I grew up. I was a freshman in high school, and I willingly went to like 20 to 30 games a year of the 05, 06, and 06, 07 Boston Bruins teams. I got a job and I bought tickets using that money. What a terrible waste of money. What an idiot I was. So to your point, yes. So to your point, playoff hockey's good. I'll take playoff hockey every day. That means that something is going right. So yeah, just get me there. Get me there with the team being healthy, and let's see what happens, because we truly don't know.
Yes, absolutely. We absolutely do not know. When the hockey experts for the Bruins are saying this, then it's what it should be, right, in terms of playoff hockey. But Ty, before we wrap this one up, let's hear from our good friends over at Factor Meals. Get started on your New Year's resolutions with Factor, so you're ready for the new year. Factor's ready-to-eat meal delivery takes the stress out of meal planning and sets you up for success in the new year. Skip the grocery stores, prep work, and cooking fatigue. Instead, get chef-crafted, dietitian-approved meals delivered right to your door. With over 35 meals to choose from each week, including options like keto, calorie smart, vegan and veggie, and more, plus over 55 weekly add-ons, you'll have a ton of nutritious and flavorful options to kickstart your resolutions. No more wasting time in the kitchen. Not only does Factor offer fast, simple solutions when I'm too busy to cook, they also help me stay on top of my goals. With offerings like Protein Plus and Keto, I can stay on track. This is definitely going to come in handy for my New Year's goals. So head to factormeals.com/poke50 and use code POKE50 to get 50% off. That's code POKE50. Factor Meals, your go-to ready-to-eat meal delivery service. And now, let's get back to the show. Shout out to our good friends over at Factor Meals and that great ad read by the one and only Evan Marinofski. Ty, some good news for Don Sweeney, announced on Friday, GM of Team Canada for the 2025 NHL Four Nations Face-Off, which will, I don't know if it's official yet, but I believe it will be Boston and Montreal next February, which will be fun. Again, kind of sucks that David Pastrnak, Boston's best player, will not be in that tournament.
Are we going to be covering those? Like, are we going to do that?
I assume so, right? I mean, it's
right.
going to be.
I assume it's
going to be. It will be something to do. I assume we'll just be at the Garden and Bell Center, so that would be fun. But it's it really does suck that you're going to have a lot of pretty marketable stars. Again, Olympics are around the corner, so they will get their moment, but still, it's going to be really weird. Like, it's going to be in Boston with all the pomp that I'm sure the NHL will want to have for it, and David Pasternak's going to be sitting at home. Maybe he doesn't mind that, when I think that's going to more or less be the NHL's bye week, I think, is when they're kind of slotting that in. But again, a tough hit for Pasternak. But Sweeney's going to be the GM of Team Canada for that tournament and assistant GM for Canada for the 2026 Olympic Games. A pretty good honor for him. And I think when you look at, I think Don Sweeney has an up and down reception from some Bruins fans in terms of how he's kind of run things. I think a lot of that is probably tied into his early years when he was on the job. But I think when you look at, especially this year and all he's done in terms of making the most out of really limited cap space and really turning what we all assume was a bridge year into a competitive team that's poised for bigger success down the road. Do you think this is Sweeney's best year as a GM?
I think it's damn close. If it's not the best, it is funny that the public perception of Don Sweeney among a lot of sports radio callers and people online is not the same as it is the people who actually work in the game. Yeah. I find that really interesting. Typically, like, he's not the first guy that's been viewed that way, right? And yeah, I think he's done a masterful job here of keeping the Bruins options open moving forward, right? And so, Noah Hannafin signs an extension with Vegas, so he's no longer an option for the team. But the Bruins have entered the offseason or potentially entering the offseason knowing that they can make a big move, right? That's a trade, that's a signing, maybe even two big moves, right? Depending on what they do. And I think that's what's really impressive is that, when you take these swings repeatedly, like, it's hard. It's hard to field a competitive roster, right? It's just like the toll, that it takes on you as a franchise is pretty much undeniable, right? It's unavoidable in a lot of ways. And if for the Bruins, the unavoidable great pain of, their failures is a $4.5 million overage this year, but then having all their options open beginning next year, like, that's a pretty damn good GM, right? And I've said this about Don Sweeney before, like on the radio. I think I said a couple weeks ago when I was on with Zolak and Bertrand, I said, like, Don Sweeney is a top 10 GM. He's not top 5, but he's top 10. Like you think about, there's a lot of bad GMs out there, a lot of bad contracts. He's not really had a ton of them. His last bad one was David Backes, I would argue.
But 2016.
Right. That's 7 years ago now, 8 years ago now. Like, and so you look at him from that standpoint, like, he's been good identifying the core, retaining that core, and signing guys to contracts that are, I think, going to age really well. Like, that Charlie McAvoy contract is going to age really well. I think the David Pastrnak contract is going to age very well at the same time as well. So I think he's good. And so best year, I still love his year last year. And that sounds crazy because they lost in the first round, but he did everything
yeah,
in my opinion, that a win now GM should do. He signed Bergeron and Krejci to amazing contracts that allow them to extract maximum value in the present. They went out, identified a fourth liner that they needed, identified a defenseman that they arguably didn't need, but they got him anyways. And then they lose Taylor Hall, and Sweeney's like, I'm not letting this slip. We're getting Tyler Bertuzzi. Like, he did everything you could have wanted the GM to do. And I tip my hat. I tip my brand new Chicago Cubs hat to Don Sweeney for last year. I think that was still his best work. The failures came at ice level, but this year I think is honestly up there for building a good team and getting back on track here.
Yeah. Last year, I think, was the outlier, right? Of after the Bruins lose to Florida. I don't think you heard one person say, Sweeney should have. Nah, that was all on what was on the ice and bench and what have you. That was nothing with Sweeney. So a great honor for him getting named Team Canada. Be very fun to see once these rosters get announced, because I imagine, especially in the Olympics, there'll be quite a few Bruins all across all those various teams, which would be fun to watch. Finally,
underrated year for Don Sweeney, the GM. What would you say? If you had to pick an underrated year off the top of your head, what would you say?
Underrated, man. Because I can't say 19 because they went to the freaking Cup final that year. But you can even say, like, 2019, they should have done more getting, like, throw the bag to get Mark Stone or something like that, right?
I say 2018. They get Rick Nash. And I know they lose Ryan Lindgren in the process, and people wish they kept him around. But like,
people thought Rick Nash was going to be there for they thought he was going to be there for another 3 years, which
right,
is awesome.
Right. He gets Ryan Donato to leave college and join the Bruins for the stretch run there. He brings in Nick Holden. You know, like he tried. I think that was his first attempt at swinging a home run trade. And you look back at like what they gave up, right? Like they traded a first round pick, Ryan Spooner, Matt Bolesky, and Ryan Lindgren to get Rick Nash, right? Lindgren's the only thing that was like of consequence for that team after that. Like I forget exactly what happened, but like that first round pick ended up getting traded, and that it didn't really like become anything. I think
was that not Keandre Miller, or was that another pick they had?
It got super convoluted after that though.
Yeah.
Like I think like that, like I think the exact Bruins pick that was traded in that deal was moved to get the pick that became Keandre Miller. I might be mistaken on this, but again, like that was a home run swing, and you could argue that they could have got McDonough instead, and maybe they should have. But like that was your attempt at the return volley, right? Like Tampa was the top dog, and you were like, no, we're gonna make our own swing here. And if Nash doesn't get concussed, he's here for another 3 years, and maybe you win in 2019. Like, so I understand and respect the vision that he had that year in terms of like, we're gonna keep this guy. He's going to solve our second line problems, and just health didn't work out. But I thought, for a first time GM going for a big home run swing, I thought that was a pretty solid trade. It just didn't work out health wise. But that team, Riley Nash, Danton Heinen, Jake DeBrusk emerging, like that was a sneaky good roster that he built that year.
We're always fans of Riley Nash. We always sing that man's praises, right?
Love
Great
him,
underrated Bruin.
Morgan Geeky's the new Riley Nash. Like he is. He's the new Riley Nash. You move him all around, play center, play wing. He can play in the top six and produce. Like, you need those guys, man. Those guys are good. You need those guys.
Absolutely. And Ty, we'll end this podcast with the same thing we did last week. And this will be the final time we do it, thank God, because by the time we record our new podcast next week, we'll probably be a day away from the playoffs. Thank God. Looking at the Bruins' potential matchups, last week we all thought it was going to be Tampa. It still is right now shaping up that way, but look at the fact that Florida's 1 point behind the Bruins. They have an extra game played, but if this team does get bumped out, would you rather them play Toronto than Tampa? I know last week we mentioned like how it might be good for this team to face a team like Tampa that's been a pain in the ass, been a tough out, but it does seem like Toronto, one, will give them a good test anyway, but they at least probably match up a little bit better if you're asking to draw between those two teams.
I'm gonna say, you know what? Screw it. Get Tampa.
Give me Tampa.
Give me Tampa. I don't know. You're gonna have to go through them at some point, right? And I feel like the last, when you start rooting for teams you want to play in the playoffs, I think that's when shit can kind of hit the fan, right? And so, if this team is gonna go where they need to go, I think slaying a dragon is kind of where you want them to go. Like that. The Bruins internally have said from the jump that they believe in their team. They believe in what they're building. And whether or not that's just media speak, right, and them just saying it, like, is who knows, right? But if you want to have instant credibility and instant believability, slay that dragon. Slay that dragon in round one and go from there. Toronto, I think that Toronto, as good as Tampa's been, I think Toronto's been really good too. In terms of like their ability to score and erase leads, I think is what would scare me about Toronto, right? Like Austin Matthews he's been incredible this year. He's been absolutely incredible. And the Leafs are currently tinkering with their lineup. They had a new second line last night that dominated play, in my opinion. And so if they're starting to figure it out in terms of slotting guys where to go and becoming a deeper roster, I still think you can outwork their defense, but if their scoring is going, I just wonder if the Bruins have enough scoring to outscore their problems, so to speak, against a team like Toronto, who we've seen this. We've seen that they can hang 2-3 goals on you real quick. We saw it in Boston, a couple months ago. So I think I just want Tampa. I think that's a physical, playoff ready, you're here now kind of opponent versus Toronto, which may be more of a okay, they're not quite as physical as the other teams, and maybe we're not ready for this. Like, I think just go 0 to 100, baby. Why not? Who cares?
I think you have convinced me that I think I'm in the same boat. I think you go in Tampa, duke it out, see what you're really made of against a team that has really ruined a lot of very promising playoff runs for this team in the past. It seems like it'd be a great time to slay the dragon. It's like if the Celtics get the Heat in the first round. Get that out of the way, right? See what you got. See if you can get on a roll here. Again, the Celtics are probably a lot more favored in that matchup in terms of just how stacked their team is. But I think, you go into that matchup, and then also let Toronto and Florida beat the shit out of each other. That's another thing as well, right? That'd be just be as a neutral playoff hockey enjoyer. That'd be a fantastic series to watch anyway. But yeah, I agree. Give me Tampa. Let the chips fall where they may. Also, if you lose to Tampa in a hard fought matchup, listen, it would suck. First round exit, but it's a good team, Tampa. A lot of playoff pedigree. If you lose to Toronto in the first round, I will have to destroy my X account. I can't go on social media anymore.
No, I can't do it. Can't do it. And I think the other thing that we might be kind of sleeping on with Toronto is that, there are some wonderful people out there who do tremendous work with their analytics. Toronto has been one of the better teams in terms of generating chances from the slot. The Bruins defense, if they are going all in on this Lindholm-McAvoy pairing, I do worry about the ability to protect the house in those 40 non-Lindholm-McAvoy minutes, right? And so that's what would worry me about that kind of team, that kind of series. So, and granted, the Bruins have been good against defending Toronto. I understand that, but in a 7-game series, they're going to get theirs. And if you're worrying about 40 minutes a night, 35 minutes a night, when you don't have 27 or 73 out there, I hate that heartburn that you're going to give your coaching staff, so to speak. So I think Tampa's the way to go. Look at the bottom of their roster. They're kind of built like you. They're top heavy. They're a physical team, gets you right in the mindset. Their defense, Sergachev's a wild card, but I feel like you've played them pretty well at home this year. The games in Tampa, you had one go to overtime, and you had one that was a 1-goal game, basically. So it's like, you know what? Screw it. Let's see it. Let's see it. Let's see the heavyweight battle in round 1. I think they'll be better off for it, win or lose. So go from there.
Good points as always from the esteemed Ty Anderson. Ty, where can we read your work? Where can we hear you on the airwaves? All that good stuff.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter and X @_Ty Anderson. Same username pretty much everywhere. You find me online. Also, you can hear me on 98.5 Sports Hub, Sports Hub Underground podcast, as well as weekly appearances I do with Zolak and Bertrand. How about yourself?
Yeah, you can read my stuff on Boston.com and the Boston Globe. Do the podcast here with you and Evan Marinofski, both Poke the Bear and Bruins Beat. You can find me on Twitter, X, whatever it's called, at Conor Ryan _93. So thank you guys again for listening. We'll be talking playoff hockey next week. Thank Christ. We're finally at the doorstep, Ty. Thank God. So again, thank you for jumping on the video once again. This is episode Poke the Bear, episode 220. My name is Conor Ryan. That's Ty Anderson. You fans have a great rest of your week.